Haribo. So, we have with us today His Grace Mahat-tattva Prabhu. Let's welcome him with a huge round of applause. Haribo! We're very fortunate to have him here. Mahat-tattva Prabhu has been here before, as some of you know. He comes from the San Diego area. Mahat-tattva Prabhu has been a brahmachari monk since he was 20 years old. He is a dynamic speaker. He's a transcendental kirtan leader. He is the editor of a magazine called 16 Rounds to Samadhi. And for those who are interested, you can take a look at his website, 16rounds.com. Mahat-tattva Prabhu also runs a Krishna Lounge program. It's a very, very successful program. It's a preaching program for the young and the Western audience. If you'd like to know more about that Krishna Lounge, you can go into krishnalounge.com, get to know all about him. So we are very fortunate to have Mahat-tattva Prabhu. I would request Mahat-tattva Prabhu to please enlighten us with your nectarian words of wisdom. Let's pay rapt attention and let's welcome him one more time with three loud Haribo. Haribo! Haribo! Haribo!
Should I first sing something or?
Whatever you desire.
Does that harmonium work?
It works
There
well.
are two. Works well.
Yeah, but it works well. Yeah, it works.
Okay.
There are two things.
Then it does work well.
About that in 1972.
Oh, this is yours.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
Yeah, they seem, as they age, they seem to get better.
Yeah.
Do you mind sitting closer? In case I don't like something, I can let you know. Just kidding. Govinda. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Should I close the stops?
Yes. Well, after you let the air out.
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm sure you did.
It's good to check. So I prepared a lecture, and then as I was singing, I thought, nah, I'll say something else. Because recently I learned something which I thought it was pretty good, and I learned this from a devotee historian. So this person is a historian, so he's a professor, and he's also a devotee. And it put things in perspective. In other words, like if I ask, how high is this? Is this high? No? He says yes, you say no. So you guys talk to each other and make a decision. We can't tell. Why we cannot tell?
So you have no frame of reference.
Correct. No point of reference. So therefore, in other words, to you, because you're shorter than him, that's pretty high. And he's pretty tall, so for him that's low. So it depends, like from this perspective it's high, from this perspective it's low. And so therefore to put things in perspective is to actually understand things. Like people say God is great. Well, how God is great, that's a whole other thing. Because just to say great is a very, very relative term. And so people who are capable of putting things in perspective are capable of actually communicating something to other people. And so this is what this person did for me. Put things in perspective. I heard him say this a long time ago, but recently for some reason became relevant. And became relevant to something I had to present. So, in German there is a term Zeitgeist, and literally means the spirit of the time. And we're all, to a great extent, products of certain times, of certain period of time. Not just time as a phenomena that happens, but things that happen within time. So therefore, if we were, for example, I was born into a traditional Catholic family. And so certain things which are very normal to me, such as that my mother serves everyone lunch and then she eats at the end, are just like, that's my concept of what a mom is. But for example, in modern America, that would, to many, be offensive. And so really, to a large extent, we're defined, for example, by the place and times we grew up in. And the times that we live in. So, so to understand the times that we're living in right now, then we can understand why do we think certain things. Or why does a human mind believe certain things nowadays and certain things just doesn't. And so to understand these modern times, let's put them in perspective. And if we put them in historic perspective, then we'll understand why do people believe nowadays what they believe. And of course there's great variety of people, so varieties of people believe varieties of things. But there is, nevertheless, there are powerful currents in people's thinking pattern throughout phases of time. And so, everyone are okay? No major catastrophe? I was in the line waiting to see Balaji in Tirupati. And we were in the line for God knows how many hours. And there was this child in one point, he started to cry, and then started to cry even more intensely. And at one point he was crying so bad, it was really bad. I never seen a child cry so intensely. I started to think, this is child abuse, take him out of here. And then another woman came and she had something in her hand and she just waved that in front of the child, and the child stopped and started to smile. And that was it. It literally looked like the child was about to die, and just a little bit of shaking of some colorful thing, and that was it. It was over. So you can never tell with kids how serious they are. So, to put things in perspective, I will tell you the history of the world since the beginning of time. No, just kidding, we don't have time for that. I'll shorten it. But I'll just, as I learned from this person, so I will also present to you certain phases in time that maybe those of you from India are not familiar with, and those of you who are from America may not be familiar with, because all this started in Europe. And America, largely what it is nowadays, is what Europeans made it. Because Europeans moved to America, and of course they killed the natives and all that, took their land, and here we are now, a few hundred years later. So, before Middle Eastern religions manifested in the world, there was this Greco-Roman civilization, also known as classical European civilization. And what's interesting about this civilization, that sometimes, even nowadays, is referred to as Hindu-European civilization, like European Hinduism. European Hinduism. Why is this so? Because unlike anything else we find in modern Europe, and which translates into modern America, this European civilization, specifically Greeks, they did not have problems between two groups of people or between two different types of learning about the world, namely physical and metaphysical. So there are physical sciences and there are metaphysical sciences. With metaphysical sciences, we'll learn about metaphysics, the spirit. In other words, by spiritual methodology, we'll learn about spirit. And by material methodology, such as chemistry, biology, physics, math, and so on, we learn about physical world. And they understood this, right? It just makes so much sense. For example, if I give you a measuring tape, with that tool, there's only so much you can learn about this world. You cannot, with the measuring tape, you cannot learn how hot it is today in Sacramento. You can only learn about distances because that is the tool you have. So therefore, it is very important to use the appropriate tool to acquire appropriate information. And so to use physical tools to understand metaphysics is to make a mistake. And no wonder these people try to learn about metaphysics like some modern people. They try to learn about spirit with physical tools, and they return back to the station and report, there's nothing metaphysical out there. My measuring tape measured only distances. And so in India, this was always known. And these two communities had no issues with each other. There was the physical community and there was the metaphysical community. And as a matter of fact, the people used both sciences to understand the world. Because the world does come into components, physical, metaphysical. Now, the very same thing was going on in Europe during the times of ancient Greeks and later on continued with Romans. Of course, not that everything these people got was perfect. There's lots to complain about Greeks and Romans. but in this aspect, this was remarkable. This was unlike what Europe turned into afterwards. So when the Roman Empire collapsed, and it was collapsing for quite some time, but as it collapsed, the Europe entered what ages?
Dark Ages.
Dark Ages. The Europe entered Dark Ages, and people call it Dark Ages. Actually, as a matter of fact, in certain academic circles, this is considered an inappropriate term. So in due course of time, got changed to Middle Ages. But nevertheless, a whole lot of people still call it Dark Ages, and I will call it Dark Ages for because it's important. It fits the presentation I'm making here. Why Dark Ages? Why Dark Ages? Because this is, of course, not that people completely sunk into ignorance during this time in Europe, but they, interestingly enough, in utter contrast to Greeks and Romans, Europe was not producing much more in terms of art, in terms of philosophy, music, poetry, literature, and so on. There was not much in terms of sophistication of thought. As a matter of fact, Rome was not exactly conquered, but it was, what's the word? Pillaged. Pillaged? Did I just make the word up? No, that's a bona fide word, okay. By barbarians. Starting with Vikings. I mean, Vikings made several tours to Rome, as far as I understand, which is quite impressive, even to Paris and so on. If you know the map of Europe, that's very impressive. And then different German tribes and even Hungarians, they all made their inroads into the Roman Empire, burned, looted, and stole stuff, and just went back. And so this is the kind of atmosphere that permeated Europe. But above this, what's really important, if you know anything about these dark times of Europe, is the church. specifically Catholic Church. I mean, they were going around and killing people. Of course, nothing new. People kill people, right? That's the history of the world. At least when I went to school, that's what we studied. And then these people killed those people, then those people, like the history of the world. But now they were killing people for what? They were killing people for thought crimes. And what were the thought crimes? The thought crimes were not even a matter of whether one was religious or not, because everyone was religious. But people were killed because they weren't religious in a very specific way. And not just externally, but internally they had to believe certain things which church itself actually fabricated. Those of you, for example, who might have read the Bible, and much what the church taught at the time is terribly fabricated. And this is an institution of people. This is an institution made up of people who claimed that certain things were true. And not only that they were true, but that these were orders by God. They were making such claims. And if you did not agree, and very explicitly agree with this, you'd be killed. And so many women were burned because they were considered witches, because, I mean, like really bizarre things. This is the dark ages of Europe. Really scary times. Imagine, I mean, you just, like, you're Christian, right? And you're of the right domination of Christianity, but you have slight disagreement, not with God, but with church, and church's interpretation of God. And off you go, you get burned. I mean, throughout history, we had these people burning people because they believed that Earth was not flat, that Earth was oval. Where are they now? They probably died out of shame. And this is the same church who was making claims that, no, it's flat. It says in the Bible, I read the Bible, it doesn't say anywhere in it about Earth being flat. But I'm being ridiculous here. But these are the kind of ridiculous things that were going on. And these were the dark times of Europe. And so, sort of reacting to these dark times, we had the Renaissance movement, and Renaissance literally means coming back to life, life again, reanimating again, coming back to life. And what was coming back to life? Well, people started to introduce this liberality again, because you see how things became so conservative. That one group of people would decide on what God is thinking, feeling, and willing, and everyone had to obey that, otherwise they were killed. Just one group of people. And any group of people can be wrong at any time. So we had this reaction where Europeans were starting to express again themselves liberally, specifically through different forms of art. Including poetry and written things and sculpture and so on. So this is Renaissance. And Renaissance basically, it's not that Renaissance engaged all of the Europe, but it was an important movement. And how many of you have heard of Renaissance? So nearly everyone. So obviously it was a powerful thing, even though it did not encompass the whole of Europe. And primarily it started in Italy and then spread on to France and so on. So in many ways this was Southern European movement. And then there was a Northern European backlash. Again, this religious conservatism, please forgive me for using terms such as Christian and so on, because according to Krishna, religion is not divided according to institution. Religion is divided according to the nature of a devotee's relationship with God. So you might be Christian, but you might be actually You might be a bhakta, or you might be a karmi, or you might be a jnani, or you might be a yogi. These are different types of religions according to Krishna. So just the fact that one's a Christian, Hindu, or Muslim doesn't really tell us much about the nature of religiosity or spirituality of that person. But historically speaking, here we have people who organize themselves as Christians, not all Christians, but one very important, powerful European institution that disseminated certain ideas and attitudes. So there was a backlash, sort of like a backlash. It was it reacted to a reaction, and what was it? It was again this very conservative element. Very conservative element. This came with the Protestant Reformation. Now, Protestant Reformation, they tried to reform Catholic Church, and there was lots to be reformed about Catholic Church. I mean, practices they were doing is just ridiculous. I mean, yesterday I looked up some of the practices that Catholic Church was practicing. I mean, people were selling spiritual positions. Like imagine in ISKCON something like a sannyas. Someone is a sannyasi, right? And then such person decides, no, I think I'll sell my sannyas. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But this is how fallen this institution became. And let alone, I mean, the levels of it became so terribly mundane. Not that every Catholic was mundane, but the mundane element became so prominent within this institution that Northern Europeans were rebelling against it. So while they were rebelling against it, they also reacted to Southern European liberalism. And so they reintroduced the conservative element, meaning the Bible. Like Bible, and that's it. And so what they did, as they were rebelling against the Catholic Church, in the process of which Catholic Church again burned a whole lot of people, were trying to reform the church. They did a terrible mistake. They emphasized metaphysics, religion, spirituality over physics. As a matter of fact, what they did was they replaced physics with metaphysics. They replaced physical sciences with religion. And so you were supposed to learn about the world not by rational means, not by sensual observation, but through the Bible. Through a religious scripture. And we see, for example, like the biblical concept of creation. There's certain concept of biblical concept of creation which has been challenged throughout time, very powerful by scientific community. And this is community that uses empirical tools such as reason, logic, senses, and so on to establish things, to establish reality from illusions. And so with their powerful logic and reason, they show that much of what Bible says is actually very wrong. And so we see that in due course of time, Catholic Church conceded, gave in to these arguments. Why? Because these arguments are correct. But they didn't start like that. They were demanding that you have to learn about everything exclusively by religious methodologies. And so now, if you know any psychiatrists or psychologists in the room, no? Okay. But we see in life that abused often becomes the abuser. When someone suffers abuse, later on they become the abuser. This is very common. And so usually people, for example, who grow up in malfunctioning families tend to initiate a malfunctioning family. Person who was beaten by their parents tend to become beaters, and so on. There is a saying that people who need love the most show it in most unloving ways. So abused become abusers. And so this is what we witness from these times, that during this period, these people emphasized so strongly abolishment of logic, reason, and empirical sciences. I mean, apparently at times they were even becoming very aggressive about this, very inappropriately aggressive about this. And so the very community they were abusive against, meaning the empirical community, what nowadays in modern times we would call the scientific community, they became the abusers. They turned against religion and threw it out. And this is the modern times. We're living in times where state has separated itself from the church. And this is reaction to this stuff that came from Middle East into Europe. And then spread all over Europe. And so nowadays, for example, Srila Prabhupada spoke very often, very aggressively against the scientific community because of this attitude of theirs. For example, in modern establishments of education, you're okay to teach religion, to preach religion, as long as you do it in negative ways. In other words, you're denying it. As long as you're saying how that's all not true, you're fine. You will not lose your job. But if you preach religion in positive ways, you cannot keep your job in modern places of education. That is the kind of situation we find ourselves in. And religion in modern times has been delegated into people's private lives. Religion in modern times has no place in public life. But how do we understand the metaphysical side of our existence? How do we understand love? How do we understand soul? How do we understand justice? How do we understand God? These are all metaphysical things. These are all spiritual things. How do we understand these things without metaphysical sciences? And therefore we see that in modern times there's great effort to reduce metaphysical things to mere physical incidences. In other words, there's an attempt to explain everything through physical incidences and reduce everything to physical incidences. So for example, people will say, modern scientific community will tell you, we know your brain. As a matter of fact, we know which part of the brain we have to stimulate so that you can feel angry, or that you can feel love, or that you can feel religious. So religion is illusion. I just need to stimulate certain section of your brain. In other words, this is an attempt to explain religion in physical terms. That religion is not a product of reality. It's not something that's real. It's an illusory manifestation of a stimulated brain. It's not religion itself. What it is, it's electronic interactions in your brain. Please don't mind me for using the following word. This is stupid. Why is this stupid? Because people who say this, they don't differentiate, they don't make difference, obviously, between the source and the media. They say that consciousness originates in brain. Why do we know? Because if I stimulate your brain, I will have created different reactions in your consciousness. But brain is not the source of consciousness. Brain is a mere conductor of consciousness. Just like faucet is not the source of water. I can install a light filter, like those colored lights. You can install that filter on your water tap. And so when the water comes through, it'll be colored. So what does that mean? That the faucet is source of water? No, the faucet is mere media for water. Water originates way back before the faucet. But they use these kind of arguments. In other words, there's such a attempt. This is not a philosophical attempt. This is not a philosophical reaction. This is an emotional reactions. And what are they reacting to? They're reacting to centuries of religious abuse. And I completely understand that. As a matter of fact, I agree with them. What's the word? I commemorize? No, that's commemorate. But to feel misery, empathy with feel with someone? Commiserate, thank you. That was a letter confusion in my mind. But I got all the letters right. I just didn't have them all in the right order. Commiserate. And so I commiserate with them. If you study European history, I hope I didn't gross anyone out, but it is gross. It's horrific. And even nowadays, some of that religious attitude is still existent in certain religious communities. They just have this prosecution type of attitude. And yet, they have no rational explanation for their own beliefs. They just demand, I've got to believe. If I don't believe, I ought to burn in hell. And so, therefore, in modern times, we have this very powerful attempt to reduce everything, to understand everything by physical sciences, and therefore reduce everything to mere physical incidences. They'll even explain people that you're not a person. You just have an illusion of a person. There's illusion of you. You don't exist. It's just a pile of chemicals that are interacting. Some other illusions created. Here's Himaja.
Smart chemical.
Smart chemicals, yeah. Very smart pile, an educated pile of chemicals. And pious and religious. The way this pile of chemicals chant Hare Krishna is wonderful. In other words, they say it's all illusion. It's just chemical, everything is chemical interaction. But interestingly enough, none of them live according to this understanding. Every single one of them, when they feel to have been treated unjustly, they demand justice. They feel pain. They want justice. Justice is a metaphysical thing. It's not a physical thing. But it don't allow for metaphysics. And why? Not because there's an awfully clear philosophical or rational explanation, but this is a psychological reaction. Because after all, human beings are primarily emotional. We are primarily emotional beings. Imagine a place where they taught truth, like very powerfully taught truth, but are very unpalatable with people. Would you be hanging out with those people? No, you'd be done and tired. You're tired and done, tired of them and done with them very quickly. Even though they're speaking truth. Because emotional side of us is very prominent, very powerful. And that's okay. That's just normal. So there's this, this is the modern reaction. And this is the times that we live in. So we're living in, what's the term, post-dramatic stress times. Did I get that right? Yeah. In other words, people have been traumatized. And seriously, if you read the historical accounts of what they were doing to people, it's traumatizing. It's seriously traumatizing. And so, these are the times we live in. Now, of course, we're not just accepting this. Of course, we're accepting this as reality because it is reality, but we're not happy with it because this reality is not right. Now, what Krishna consciousness has to offer is this Vedic concept, which is a very beautiful concept if you consider what Europe and then eventually America had to go through for centuries. Vaishnavism has an amazingly beautiful message. And that is that these two communities and these two ways of learning about world are friends. And they need each other. You cannot, with metaphysical processes, you cannot learn. I mean, when did we learn about germs? Europeans had no clue about germs. I mean, they were dying from... There were several plagues in Europe that killed thousands and dozens and hundreds of thousands of people. Which back then was a lot of people, considering how few people lived back then in comparison to modern times. Because they did not know germs. And who discovered germs? I mean, people came up with a microscope. In other words, the scientific community. And then they told them to use soap. Of course, in India, they were already bathing 3 times a day, unlike Europeans. That's how perfume came about. I don't know if you knew that. Did you know that? You did not? Oh my goodness. That's how perfumes came about. Because people would take baths once or twice in a lifetime. I'm not kidding. Bathing, that was like, just, what's that? And then of course people were stinky. That's how perfume industry came about. Europeans started to bathe relatively late. So in Vedic culture, we don't have issues with empiric sciences. And we have answers to empiric so-called challenges. So we don't have to be disturbed like certain Middle Eastern traditions who had no answers to scientific challenges. And as a matter of fact, if you read books, if you read publications by modern atheists, they're almost exclusively reacting to Christianity and Middle Eastern thought. Certain Middle Eastern concepts, not all of them, but some of them. Like Richard Dawkins and his The God Delusion book, which is, by the way, philosophically devastatingly bad. Like his concept of religion and religious thought, religious history is obviously addressing almost exclusively Middle Eastern traditions as they were understood and practiced in Europe. And then later on spread all over the world. he's not answering, for example, Vedantic monistic thought. And when I say monism, Vaishnavism is also monistic thought, not in the sense that we're all one, but monistic in the sense that we don't differentiate between divine and profane. Everything's divine. Even matter is divine in the sense that it's God's energy. And we don't say matter, horrible matter. No, we use everything in Krishna's service. We're not repulsed by anything. We have children. I don't, but some of you have. And we don't say that is illusory. That is very real. I mean, the home where I'm hosted, that's rather a very comfortable home. And we don't say that's illusory. No, it's real. Using Krishna's service. We don't have the concept, like, for example, in one of the Middle Eastern traditions, they would dedicate one day a week to God, and the other days a week to mundane stuff. But in Vaishnavism, we don't make such differences. Every day is for God. Everything we do is for God. We eat for God, we sleep for God. Everything's divine. And then ultimately, if we don't have that vision, that's the vision we ought to get to. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam chamai pashyati. Krishna says, one who sees me in everything and everything in me, tasyaham na pranashyami sachame na pranashyati. Such a person is not lost to me, nor am I lost to that person. And he's not saying that this is some kind of a trick to help you stay God conscious. No, this is real. We have nothing against anything. Everything has its purpose. Knife in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you use it in bad ways. Again, it's not a bad thing. You just use it in bad ways. Like this whole discussion in America about weapons. Are weapons bad or good? Well, it depends how you use them. Right? In certain situations, thank God for weapons. In certain situations, horrible. Not good at all. So everything, I mean, sex. Is sex good or bad? Well, it depends how you use it. Everything has purpose and place in Krishna consciousness. And so also biology, chemistry, physics, all of this has its place. We're not saying that's all useless. No, it's not useless at all. It has its place. So empiric inquiry has its place. And we don't reject it. And so this is very important because you see when people have this kind of a dualistic vision, like that's mundane, profane, ugly, dirty, and all this is divine here, the church stuff, right, the temple stuff. I mean, even people say, like, don't enjoy music. Right? Music is Maya. Music is illusion. So you should, when you chant Hare Krishna, you should chant it in most ugliest way possible. But the problem is not music. The problem is people who are addicted to music as a means for their own selfish gratification rather than music as a beautiful means to please God. To make a beautiful offering. So same thing, are we for or against tasty food? Well, it depends. If you're a food addict, then you better stay away from a devotee kitchen. And so in this way we can think of everything. Is sense gratification bad? No, it's not. Body cannot exist without sense gratification. Body means senses. It has to be gratified to a certain extent. In other words, certain amount of comfort and pleasure has to be provided for the body. Otherwise, the body disintegrates. So again, depends what you use it for. And this is what people have difficulty understanding. So what they end up with, they end up labeling things, like they're, okay, sorry, I'll backtrack just a little bit. Like people say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Wrong. Power does not corrupt. Power is great, it's another energy of God. But if you, power hungry, selfish person, when you come in contact with power, position of power, and then you abuse it for selfish purposes, that's bad. But it's not power's fault, it's your fault. You're morally deficient, you're morally ill. And therefore, to you, we say power corrupts. But power in and of itself does not corrupt. Power is morally neutral. Like every other energy of God, it's morally neutral. So very often in the name of religion, people label some things good and some things bad. But all things are good. If anyone's bad, it's you, who does not know how to relate and use things appropriately. And so therefore there's no need to separate the world into two groups. Because otherwise, when you do this, the groups will declare a war against each other. And therefore we have, at times when religion was winning, then we had the empiric side of existence squashed and suffered, and now they reversed. You know, when the abused came to the position of power, now they're abusing the previous abuser. And none of this has anything to do with rational thought. And these are the times we live in. And so the message that Krishna consciousness has to offer to the world is a very powerfully synthetic message. Synthetic in the sense of synthesizing, bringing together. Rather than calling one thing illusory, the other thing real. I mean, just one detail to make it really controversial, because I want to provoke some questions. Forgive me for trying. Sannyasi is usually a man, a male person in the renounced order of life. And if a sannyasi says, that's a beautiful sunset, then you'll say, oh, very nice. And if a sannyasi says, that's a beautiful woman, woo! What's the difference? What is the difference? Now the fact is, I'll tell you what the difference is. First of all, there are no differences.